Hello everyone. So in this video, we have to take a series of integers as input one at a time. So for that we are using the input function input enter an integer. Okay. So now the result of the input function will be a string. Now this string will be stored temporarily in a variable called I. So I equal to input enter an integer. Now we have to take multiple integers, series of integers input. So basically we'll have to use a while loop. You can in the while loop, now what will be the condition? So basically we have to ask the user to enter x to stop. There should be some stopping point because we have not given any count, like whether we are taking 5 integers or 10 or 50. So when the user enters x, whether small or uppercase, lowercase or uppercase, we'll convert it to lowercase so that we'll match it with x basically. And if it is x, then stop. If it is not x, till then what we have to do, we have to keep taking the input and we have to convert it to an integer using the int constructor or int function. Now we have to add it to a list. So we need to create a list. So the name of the list is, let's say, integers. We create an empty list using a pair of square brackets, or we can also use a list constructor. Then we'll simply say list name, that is integers dot append and I. So we'll append I to the list. Now the next step is we also have to take the next number as input in the loop, right? So I equal to input enter an integer. And now just print the list so that we can know whether our numbers have been entered in the list properly. So we'll just print the list now. Okay. So let's see. Let's enter some inputs and we'll enter x to stop. So all the numbers have been entered properly. Okay. Now let's say users enter some other value instead of integer. Okay. Let's say we'll enter some valid inputs first and then user enters a. Now a cannot be converted to an integer. A is not an integer, right? So you will get value error. That is also a part of our problem statement, that value error has to be handled. Our program should not stop here. What happened here? 1, 2, 3 were valid, but still they were not added to the list. And also the user did not get a chance to add even more numbers to the list. The user may have pressed, A by mistake, by accident, but still the program has crashed. So with exception handling, we can prevent this. Okay. So exception handling is done with the try and except blocks. In the try block, we'll put the statement I is equal to int I. That is where the exception arises. When you try to convert the value in I to an integer, and if it is not an integer, then we get an exception. So we put that in try block, and in except block, we are catching value error as V. Now value error is the name of the exception and V is the object in which the exception will be caught and stored. Okay, so the message that we want to give the user may be non-technical end user. So the message should be simple enough. So the message will be please enter an integer. Okay, please enter an integer, or enter integer values only. So that message, that kind of a message we can give. And let's see how this runs. Okay, so now let's say 1, 2, 3, and let's say A. Now enter integers only. And now let's say we enter 4, 5, and we stop with X. So now what will happen is A also becomes a part of the list. This is not something we want to happen. So now we'll make use of the other clauses or other blocks which are there provided by the exception handling facilities in Python. Okay, so now what we want to do is, if there is an exception, then the except clause will be executed and the user will get a message what went wrong. And integers.append I should not be executed if there is an exception. Okay, so we'll put that in else block. Else block is executed when there is no exception. So the number will be added to the list, integer will be added to the list only when it is a valid integer. And because we always have to take a new integer as input every time, so that will go in finally. Whatever is there in the finally clause is always executed. Okay. So irrespective of whether there is error or not. Okay, so these are the try, except, else, and finally blocks in exception handling. Okay, now let's see what's the effect of this. Okay, basically what will happen here is, now the if there is an error, it will not be stored in the list. Our list will only contain valid integers, and the loop will go on, even if the user enters one or two, whatever user enters any invalid integers by mistake, still the loop will go on. Okay, now let's see how it works. Okay, so let's say we give the same input, let's say 1 2, so let's say 1 3 4 a 5 x. Okay, and as you can see, a is not added to the list, so we have handled value error successfully. Now there is another part in the problem statement which says that the number should only be between 1 and 100, and we have to ensure that using assertions. So the keyword that, or the clause that we use here, is the assert clause. The syntax is assert, that is the keyword, followed by the condition that you want to assert. So the variable I should be between 1 and 100, that is the condition. And if that condition is not satisfied, then what will be the error message is written after the comma. So after the comma, we have written that please enter an integer between 1 and 100, something like that. Okay. So, okay, let's say enter an integer between 1 and 100. Okay, both inclusive. You can enter 1 and 100, both inclusive. Okay, so now we also have to add one more except clause. Now the error that is thrown if the assertion is not obeyed is called as assertion error. Okay, so we'll have to write a separate except clause. A try block can have multiple except clauses. So this except clause will handle assertion error, except assertion error as a, let's say. Okay, so the assertion error will be caught by this except block, and that object will be stored in a. And now, because that object already has the appropriate error message, simple message, we'll simply print a. So whatever message we have given here in the assert clause, the same message will be printed when we try to print a over here. Okay, so now let's run and see what happens. Let's save this and run this. Okay. Now let's say we gave the same input, 1 2 3 a, or let's say 4 5 a. Okay, let's say 6 or whatever, -1. Now for -1, we'll get the assertion error. 200 also will give us assertion error, and then we enter x to stop. At some point, let's say enter one more valid number, and let's then stop. So now our list contains only valid integers. So we have handled both value errors and assertion error successfully. Okay, that's it for this video. If you have any questions, any doubts, do post them in the comments below. Thanks for watching.